Hi everyone. Excuse me. So we're going to get started with our review of the two-point perspective shapes. And in many ways, what we're doing with this assignment is very similar to what we did with one-point perspective, in the sense that we're exploring creating very simple geometric shapes in perspective. The biggest difference is that what we're doing is, instead of using one point, we're actually using two. Okay. Now, I think the easiest way to really understand this is to see, let's just look at this drawing maybe right here. And when you think of one point perspective would be where we would stand maybe here. I'm just sort of imagining yourself standing right here and looking face on to these shapes. That was one point perspective last year. Now imagine that you're actually walking and walking to the side, like the corner of a building. So you're looking at an angle and you're sort of able to see more of the two sides with the angle. What happens when you do that is, instead of having one point, we're actually splitting that one point into two. So instead of, if I could animate it, I would have this one point kind of splitting into left and right. And so one side now goes to one point, to the left, and the other side goes to the other point. And that's all two-point is just a change in where you're standing. That's it. And then when we go to three-point next week, it'll just be another change in position. And we'll talk about that in next week's critique. But that's all the difference that it is. But I think the key thing too is, when you add that extra vanishing point, you have to kind of spend some time figuring out, oh, where does this go? And I think that takes a little bit of, just planning, but you'll get it. But the other thing too is it gives you a different view to look at, and it kind of changes the composition. One point perspective can tend to be a little more, when you're face on, a little more solid and stable. And then two point, because you've got more angles happening, all of these different angles, the point of view tends to be a little more dynamic. You also tend to be kind of a little bit more in the scene. At least that's how I think of it. But that's it. So that's the big difference there. So if you feel like, oh, they're so different, they're really not. It's just that change in your view where you're standing. Okay, Michelle. Right. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed two-point perspective. I really like it too. It really is just, suddenly things kind of tend to become a little more, maybe a little more dimensional. Um, and I think you did a really good job here at showing how you're converging to all these points, which is fabulous. It's what you wanted to do, and you've really utilized all of the space, which is great. So, and you have, so I would say, okay, so just a few things I would maybe work on is maybe have just a few more shapes that are see-through. Pick just about half, wherever you want for them to be see-through, like this one. Maybe this side, so this side right here looks like, I think you always want it to be parallel to each other, parallel to the edge of the page. So I might just kind of tweak that a little bit. So then this would go here and here, just like that, kind of tweak that. Um, all of the other shapes look really good. Keep those lines in place. Those lines you use to construct these. You'll notice, and this is sort of a general comment for everybody, that we tend to do a lot of this type of thing in perspective, where we take an existing shape, in this case like the rectangular prism, and we use it to kind of help us find, in a lot of cases, it's center lines. Like, where is the center? Because things are angled, it's very hard to tell where is that center. So we're using these crosses to help us figure out, okay, there's the center right here. And that will then help us, if we wanted to in this case we want to create an a triangle that is equal. You don't always want that with triangles, but in this case we do. So now we know that midpoint. So where is it going to be? And that'll also help us create this line right here, right here. So just make sure to keep those lightly sketched in, just like as part of a guideline, rather than erasing it. That way it's easier to see where they exist. And I think that's about it. Maybe straighten up this line looks a little bit angled here. Could maybe straighten it up just a little bit. It looks pretty good, but maybe you could straighten that up and maybe kind of like make your all of your edges equal, like in weight. So maybe darken these two edges. And as you're doing the, adding a few more uh, see-through shapes, you could just kind of add that in there. Um, that's it. And let's see, maybe I think your presentation looks pretty good. It is a tiny bit dark. You might go up to the image, maybe do an auto contrast in Photoshop. It actually didn't do very much, did it there? So I'm just being a little bit fussy there because I always like to see the white of the paper, but it looks really pretty clear, and that's what we're always looking for, is to make sure everything looks clear and easy to read. So yeah, okay, that's it. I think you're almost there. Okay, Amy. All right, yeah, you did a nice job with this. Really understood 2-point perspective and building your shapes in here. It looks great. Construction method. You've got half your shapes opaque and see-through. That looks great. Yeah, so I would say, the only thing I'd recommend, just two small things. One, feel free to add some more shapes to exceed that 9 shape minimum. And something to keep in mind, just in general, don't worry about it for this assignment. But keep in mind that it's always easier to draw a little bigger. Especially when we get into more of the realistic scenes later on, you'll find it can be really helpful. So make your shapes just a tiny bit bigger to fill the space. In this case, I would just use these empty spaces to add some more shapes, fill the page. Why not? The other thing, small point is, I think you could probably correct your color a little bit. It's a little bit black, pardon me, yellow. So you could do an auto color in Photoshop, image auto color. That really fixes things. I also went ahead and grabbed some, let me just go into the thread here. There were some videos I had sort of bookmarked somewhere from an instructor who was teaching this class, who did these really lovely videos on photographing artwork, and also in this second one, photoshopping. And she goes into a lot more detail than I do in the video critique, in our video critique. So you might want to, everybody take a look at these. The first one is on how to photograph your artwork, and the second one is just photoshopping. And I just put it at the last, I just posted it here into the thread directly. So take advantage of that if you want to learn a little bit more about how to, finesse your documenting of your drawings. Micah, all right, so let's see, this was your scan, and this was your photograph. So I would say that you could just go ahead here and photograph your artwork. Let me just zoom in here a little bit more. Because I don't know, your camera looks pretty good. I don't know what kind of cameras have come a long way, even inexpensive cameras. Maybe it's your phone, but it looks like your camera can take a pretty good picture. So I would actually say, because I know you said your scanner was too small, just photograph it and use those video tutorials that I just pointed to how to photograph a little bit better. You want to make sure it's not angled and incorrectly that way. And use that, and then use the Photoshop instructions if you need it. And I think you'll be in great shape. Scanners can be really terrific. I love my scanner, and it actually is very accurate. But sometimes it's not. And also, in your case, you mentioned about the paper size. When you photograph it, you can use your bigger paper size, which is always better. It's always better to draw on bigger paper than to try to scrunch things into a smaller paper if you can. So that's what I'd recommend doing. Okay, let me know if you have any questions, but hopefully that's going to help resolve everything. Okay, let me just, okay. All right, yeah, I think you did a nice job here. You've got everything plotted in nicely. And so I would say just make sure about half of your shapes are see-through. Some of these are. When you have the see-through shape, let me just get a better line tool here. Just kind of darken the interior sides to the same level as your exterior, like the ones on the outside. Just, just fill these all in. So you want about half of your shapes. It looks like you've got almost half, maybe just a few more, just kind of count them up. And make sure to leave your guidelines in, just like I mentioned to somebody previously. Keep those guidelines in for how you constructed these shapes. Just kind of put them back in, with the line up the center. Make sure you have those. You can just lightly sketch them in. And that's it. I think, if you do all that, you'll be in great shape. Um, I wanted to mention something interesting that's happening in your drawing right here. So I'm just going to pull these lines out here. Here's approximate. So you can see here, I don't know if everybody can notice this. This shape up here, can you see how it looks a tiny bit distorted? Even though, can you see I'm checking all of these lines, and I can see here that it was constructed perfectly according to two-point perspective. But sometimes you'll notice sometimes when shapes get kind of close to the vanishing point, sometimes when they get a little high or a little low, that they start looking distorted. And that's not your fault. It's actually the fault of perspective itself. Like that perspective it's a formula and it's not real life necessarily, even though we try to make it look like real life. And when you get outside of a certain kind of quadrant, like you could say there's a certain sort of, excuse me, sort of area in here where things look quite natural. And then when you go outside of that area, and you'll start to notice things get a little distorted. So you can kind of keep that in mind, like it's not, what you don't necessarily not have to draw in those areas, but you can sort of say, hey, when it gets a little distorted there, I notice that it's not it doesn't look quite natural. So maybe I'll stick closer in, you know? So yeah, maybe just again, just sort of darken a few more of these. Just keep your edges not, at the same level of darkness. That will really be good. Okay, good job. Okay, Rhonda, yeah. I'm glad you were able to do this a couple times. I really think that makes it just starts really integrating it into your mind, which is what we want. Yeah, this looks really good. I think you did a nice job with this, understanding two-point perspective. I think your presentation looks really good, and I only have just a few small suggestions here. Um, One is, let's see, so this line, so right up here, this is always where I get a little confused. Sometimes it's hard to know uh, which way to vanish it. And so this is correct. But once you get here, on this side, you want to vanish it down to here. Does that make sense? So this will be coming, oops, this will be coming down here. Um, and I would put in the roof here. So you get a roof at the top. It's going to look a little weird because it's so close to the vanishing point, but that's okay. So I'm going to start by just drawing the triangle here parallel, and then I can take and go down. These would be guidelines, of course. My guidelines are a little dark, and then it'll join just like that. It gets a little flattened out here, but that's the correct way to do it. I think you've got, so this is very flat here because it's on the horizon line. Isn't that interesting how that does that? I would just sort of darken any of your edges, like go through here and just kind of darken these little edges that appear a little missing. Darken the inside of your, wherever you want these to be see-through. I don't know why my Photoshop's doing that. Just kind of go in here and just darken them out. You can make them exactly the same darkness as your outside. Go through and just pick half of your shapes and do that. And you've got, I think, 9 shapes. So feel free to add in a few more if you want to just kind of expand. That 9 is the minimum, but feel free to add a few more. It's always good to kind of go above the requirements and practice a little bit more. Okay, nice job. Okay, Christina, yeah, I think you've got the hang of this. So you've got your shapes kind of vanishing off to this point, which is great. And this side here, I think this guy right here, let me get a little bit of a bigger line here. So this line right here would be going back to the vanishing point here. So you just want to straighten that. And yeah, so I think you've got the hang of that. So what I would probably work on a little bit more is your craft. So your craft definitely feels like you're like doing a lot of sort of sketching motions where you're going over lines a lot of times and sort of sketching them in. And that, as I've mentioned before, is actually a great drawing technique in other types of environments where you want to kind of keep things looser. But in perspective, try to keep things really as tight as possible. So your guidelines will be lightly sketched in, and then take your ruler and just draw using your ruler. Don't freehand anything. Just keep it nice and clean and accurate. And the reason why we do that in perspective, as you probably heard me mention before, is because in perspective, we're aiming for making forms really look accurate, like they're following the perspective. And there is room, a lot of room for freehand in perspective, when you get a little bit more comfortable with it. But I think in the beginning, it's really good just to kind of, use the student examples as a guide, but just kind of keep things nice and clean. Start with your guidelines lightly sketched in, darken your edges. Make sure that half of your shapes are see-through. You've got a few here, just make sure they're all see-through and kind of really get all those back sides in. And I would also draw one more, rectangular house, but this time make it look like a house in the sense that, the roof, like just like this configuration, so that, it's great to do another type of triangle here, but make a house, somewhere else. I would actually just start with a new piece of paper so you can really, um, you won't have to do a lot of erasing. But do another house like this. Make sure to keep these guidelines sketched in, like so, that are using to construct your shape. Just to keep those there's part of your guidelines, keep them lightly sketched in. And I think that's the main thing. With your triangles, so our triangles don't go to any of the guidelines. So what we're doing with them is just keeping them, they're going to keep, let me do that again. They're going to keep parallel to what's at the front. So you just take that back angle and you kind of make it parallel there. All right, okay, I'm looking forward to seeing your revision. And also, you might also want to take a look at the photographing and photoshopping videos. I would just, watch, shadows happening on your drawing. Make sure that you kind of adjust the color so that it's has less yellow in it, just to fix that a little bit more. Okay, let me know if you have any questions.